Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to today's webinar, the 8th in the Back to Business series of 12 webinars, offering practical tips to help you rebuild on the back of recent bushfire, drought, floods and storms. My name is Megan Rogers and I'm Manager of AWI Sheep Connect New South Wales, Australian Wool Innovations Extension Network in New South Wales. These webinars are hosted by Meat and Livestock Australia, Australian Wool Innovation, AWI Sheep Connect New South Wales and Integrity Systems Company, with support from New South Wales DPI, New South Wales LLS and New South Wales farmers. Our hour-long webinars are held weekly every Tuesday at 1 p.m. and will offer resources and support to help those impacted by recent events get back to business. Our webinars have been set up as standalone events, so we can directly email you the recording of each webinar an hour after it's finished. However, this does mean that you'll need to register for each webinar individually. And with this in mind, we've kept the registration process as streamlined and as brief as possible, with 3 questions over and above your contact details. To assist with this, you'll receive a registration link for next week's webinar in your email following today's webinar. I've also posted on the Sheep Connect New South Wales website in the tools section, and any handouts that we share in the webinars are also available with a corresponding recording on our website. I would also like to ask now that you please answer the brief evaluation survey at the conclusion of today's webinar, because your feedback is very important to us and I cannot emphasise this enough. All of our partnering organisations are keen to hear your feedback and are committed to provide services to you that are relevant, timely and most of all helpful to your business. Please take the time to answer the 6 questions at the end of this webinar, and I thank you in advance for your help with this. I'll now run through the housekeeping for today's webinar. All attendees are in listen-only mode, which is standard procedure for all of our webinars. If you can't see the control panel on the right of the screen now, click on the red arrow where my mouse is hovering now. Click on that arrow there and that will help you expand that control panel. We don't have any handouts to put in today, but this is a standard part of our webinar. There are some links which Luke's going to provide, which I'll send through the chat mechanism today and also ensure that they're up with the webinar recording at the conclusion of today's webinar. To ask a question, please click on the triangle in the GoToWebinar control panel that's next to the word questions, and then that will send a little drop-down box and enter your question for the staff member where it says enter a question for staff. I'll collate all of the questions as they come in and they'll all be asked at the conclusion of the presentation today, and Luke will answer those questions verbally. I'd now like to introduce our polling question, which basically gives me an idea of who's joining us today, and it also gives me some assurity that the technology is working in both directions, that you can hear us, we can see you interacting with us, and it's also going to inform us on who's joined us today. So our usual poll question is, what is your industry role? We've got 5 answers available there: sheep producer only, cattle only, mixed species, advisor or other. And judging by how fast the answers are coming in, we've obviously got some repeat attendees today. So we've got 65% of people have voted today. I'll leave that open for another 5, 2, 1. We've got 70% of the votes in. Okay, so I'm going to share the results with you now so everybody can see who's joining us. We've got 31% are sheep only, 15% are cattle only, 12% are mixed. We've got 31% advisors joining us today and 12% who don't fall into any of those categories. Thanks everybody for participating in that. And thank you all for your patience. I'll now introduce today's presenter, Luke Stephen, Technical Specialist Sheep Breeding with New South Wales DPI. Luke's been with New South Wales DPI for a great many years, and prior to joining New South Wales DPI, it was with Sheep Genetics based in Armidale. Many of you will know Luke, and certainly his experience in the field of genetics and breeding is extensive. I've certainly encountered Luke over the years that I've been in industry, and he's got a wealth of information and will no doubt impart quite a significant amount of wisdom on today's topic. Welcome, Luke, and I'll now hand over to you, and I'll mute myself once we get underway.
Thanks, Megan. Okay, just getting the screen set up, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. It's a great honour to talk on such a, I guess, interesting topic, and hopefully what I present today will add value to your business, both if you are an individual producer and potentially if you are in the business of providing advice. So Megan, just confirming you can see my screen, my presentation, sorry.
Yep, we sure can. Yep. Ready to roll. Excellent. So I'll mute myself now.
So here we go. So as Megan said, I'm the technical specialist with sheep breeding. I've worked in the area of sheep genetics for just over 11 years and was with breed plan in the cattle game for a couple of years prior to that. So I have a fair knowledge, as Megan said, of the commercial application of genetics in enterprises. And today I want to talk about the opportunity to drive livestock operations. So what today is not about how to use breeding values or what are breeding values. It's more around what are the opportunities that we as industry, as sheep producers, cattle producers, etc., face coming out of, I guess, some unfortunate times. So once again, thanks to all the organisations that have been working on this. I think there's been a great ability through this series to showcase a whole range of talent to a wider audience that we don't necessarily get through face-to-face mechanisms. So getting into today's talk, so there's really two hard questions that we face around our livestock enterprises when it comes to going in and coming out of natural disasters. So natural disasters, I'm talking about drought, I'm talking about bushfires, and I'm talking about floods. So as we go into those, we have a lot of stock, we need to reduce them, and it's a case of how do I keep those good ones still in my flock or herd. Obviously, with some natural disasters, that decision isn't necessarily made a decision we make, that is made, unfortunately, through other circumstances. But I'm here today to not focus on that. I'm here to talk about coming out of hard times where our breeding herd or flock has been reduced significantly. How do I find enough good ones to maintain quality in my operation as I build out of drought or come out of these hard times? So I think the first step in doing this is really just taking 5 and evaluating your current situation. So that is, what class of stock do you have at the moment, and what is your goals in what you're doing with your breeding stock? And this gives you an opportunity to identify what you want to change. So it's important that you do that and that you've got a plan that you work towards. And that's the third part of having a plan of how you're going to get there. So if it is that you want to keep the status quo, you just want to do it on a greater scale, how do you scale up? So when I talk about the rebuild options, I'm talking about ultimately two parts. So one is this diversifying. If you do identify that you want to change your operation, the option of bringing in stock, and I'm talking about for breeding purposes only. I'm not talking about trade stock here. This is solely a case of if we're looking to rebuild our female population to then drive our herd or flock. The second part of that, so if we're not diversifying or we're not bringing in stock, it's about how do we build from our current cohort. And then I'll finish today's talk just around some of that selection and strategies and things that we need to be mindful of. So when we're talking about diversifying your enterprise, that might be changing species, i.e. going from sheep to beef, beef back to sheep, or in any other industry such as goats. Changing breeds might be more of a sheep thing where you're looking to bring in more border Leicesters, Pole Dorsets, etc., but not crossbreeding might become part of your enterprise in cattle. The type of sheep, so if it's a merino, going down another step, are you continuing to purchase superfine sheep, or are you changing and choosing a different type? And then ultimately through those first three, are you changing the target market that you're producing for your stock? So in terms of buying in for your females portion of your herd or flock, one of the positives is this ability to significantly scale up on an instant basis. There's a potential upgrade there within the flocks or herds, and I'll put a star on that because that all depends on knowing. So you can't just say I bought new stock and it's an upgrade. As I mentioned with Diversify and buying in, it might mean that you're now targeting new markets. So if you're buying in genetics or a strain of flock in a sheep example that are faster growing, does it then mean that you have more surplus stock as opposed to keeping things like wethers for wool production? So there's some of the positives around buying in. Some of the things that are negatives, obviously when there isn't a large number of surplus stock on the market, the cost of replacements is high, and we're seeing that definitely in the sheep game at the moment with first cross ewes up around $400. So one of the negatives is how much you're going to have to pay to get back into the game or increase those numbers. Is it financially viable in terms of, are you buying young stock at high prices that you can get multiple lambings out of, or are you buying older ewes that you may only get 1 or 2 lambs out of? Suitability to local challenges is a really important point in bringing stock in. So are you buying sheep that can run in the environment, or from cattle if they're going to areas where things like ticks might be a problem as well? So if we're talking sheep, it's things like, can they hold up to worm challenges that may not be in their existing environment, or fly strike? And then another negative potentially is that consistency of those animals with what you currently have. If you have a product that is sold on some sort of consistency of quality. If we're talking about bulk quantity production, where we're looking to just get as many lambs or as many steers, heifers off to market, that obviously becomes less of an issue. So some of the unknowns with regards to buying in stock. So the additional management or investment that's required. So if they are animals that may not be as resistant or resilient to the conditions, is it more animal health there coming in? How do they compare to your stock? That's important to know in terms of then how do you target your breeding program around which rams or bulls to buy? And then the big unknown is, are you buying people's problems? So are you introducing stock that have been deemed fit for sale by someone else because they don't fit and there's a problem there? Alternatively, are you buying in animals such as preg tested in calf or scanned in lamb that may have issues that you need to manage, such as birth weight and dystocia? But I'm going to talk very briefly around how can you benchmark those animals compared to what you currently have. One thing could be the average of the rams or bulls used over those ewes or cows, and you can only do this using objective information, being ASBVs or EBVs that take that environment component out. It's no point comparing the average weight of the bull, what they were bought on, or the average weight of the sheep or its fleece weight. They're not accurate comparisons. You have to use ASBVs for sheep, EBVs for cattle, or indexes to make some sort of objective comparison between those two. A better option in some breeds is the use of DNA technology. So the flock profile that's currently out through Sheep DNA and Heifer Select, which is an Angus product just hitting the market, enables producers to genomically sample a small subsection of that cohort and get an average genetic merit for that cohort, which could be used as an average of the flock. So if I was a sheep producer, I could potentially flock profile both groups and then make some comparisons about how do they compare differently and what management actions I may need to take. When comparing bloodlines in merino sheep, the Merino Bloodline Performance Package, which is a New South Wales DPI publication, is another good example of a tool that can make some comparisons between bloodlines, and that's based solely for a limited number of traits, but it is still a tool that is available for industry to use. And then finally, you have the option of on-farm trials. So provided that you've got some sort of decent linkage between them, i.e. you're joining similar bulls or identical bulls across, or rams, sorry, across both groups, looking at consistency in terms of that performance there. So there's sort of some of the things that can help with that benchmarking. But bringing buying into the flock or herd to a close, the main points you need to consider are infrastructure investments required, i.e. if you're changing to a different species or you're going back into a species, what are the conditions of your facilities like, and are they going to provide a safe and stress-free environment for your livestock and your workers? So that's important to note, not only in terms of you're changing species, but if you've completely destocked and you're getting back into the game, it's also something that you need to make sure that your facilities are going to provide a stress-free environment for your animals and for your staff so that we can get back to business as quickly as possible. In terms of buying in stock, I really stress to the audience here today around making informed decisions on stock. So having objective information guide your decisions, making sure that structurally those sheep or cattle that join your flock or herd match up to your objective, to what you want to achieve. It's no point buying stock that aren't going to fit your environment and they're going to break down because you don't get the return on your investment, which unfortunately in our current situation, we don't have the luxury as sheep or cattle producers to do. We really have to get back to business by getting back in the black in terms of our livestock operations. The final point I really wanted to consider is, as I mentioned earlier, one of the concerns we have to be mindful of when introducing stock is bringing in potentially people's problems. So it's really important that you've got a solid biosecurity plan in place for your operation for those introduced stock. So in terms of the 5 pillars of a good biosecurity plan, it's important that those incoming livestock are segregated to begin with, that you've got a sound animal health plan. So is that a quarantine drench? You've got some sort of access procedure for any other visitors that are joining the place. You're keeping a monitor of pests and diseases on the farm, and with that is a sound record keeping. So this is 5 pillars of biosecurity for livestock, but it could quite easily be the current restrictions we've all got put on top of us at the moment with regards to COVID. So more information just around this buying in part. So the New South Wales DPI have a prime fact on buying replacement ewes, and that can be accessed through the DPI website, which I'll put there. There's also a biosecurity information sheet there, and there's also the New South Wales DPI recovery page, which has a range of information, not just to the recovery of livestock, but the recovery of other areas of our enterprises, so feed base and soils. So I really encourage you to have a look at that page. They're all accessible off the DPI website. Okay, so in terms of breeding up options, so this is where we're using our existing stock to be able to get back to the numbers that we'd like to do. And there's 3 ways we can do this. So if you're classing out animals and joining them to a different breed, rather than keeping them in the self-replacing part of your industry, we can reduce the percentage of animals there. We can introduce a higher percentage of our maidens or heifers into our flock or herd. And the other option that we can do is retaining that oldest age group. So rather than, I guess if they're still producing, sending them to market, we keep them for another year on the proviso that they're still performing. So some of the positives around breeding up, that consistency in terms of your herd and flock, you know the quality of the stock that you have. And with that, then you know that they're performing to your objective. Some of the things you need to watch, obviously relevant to buying in, it's a lot slower to build up to historic numbers. Yeah, we do realise that across the state, across the country, there's a lot of people whose breeding programs are anywhere between a third or lower of what they were. So we do realise that this might not be the approach for everyone. One of the other things you need to watch, obviously, if you're introducing a lot of maidens or heifers, is that reproductive performance, in terms of that they will be lower and you need to manage them differently. And the other thing along the lines is that you have to be mindful of is compromises that you will see in merit because we're selecting more, and also compromises in structure. So making sure that if you are breeding up, that you're not relaxing your standards to an extent on those must cull features. So in terms of changing your flock or herd structure, two things I really want you to watch here, particularly if you're got older sheep or cattle in. So are the older animals still performing is really key here. You know, and then on that, do they require additional management to perform? And the same could be said with our young stock in terms of what additional management do you need to introduce into your enterprise to make sure that those animals get to the right recommended condition scores for target joinings and getting reproductive performance. And why that is important, I'll talk on shortly. So in terms of introducing maidens or more maidens into your flock or herd, it's dependent on the number of age classes as to how many additional maidens you can introduce. These animals, if you're doing your job in terms of buying better bulls and rams each year, are genetically superior. But as I mentioned previously, they're going to require additional management to get a simple or satisfactory reproductive performance. So I'd just like to touch on that point around age classes and how many maidens you can introduce into the flock. So this is the work of a colleague of mine. And what I want you to focus on here is the number of age groups in the female breeding herd goes from left to right, 3 through to 8. And we have a range of different reproductive rates going down the page. And what you'll see at certain age groups, that if the reproductive rate isn't high enough, then we simply do not have enough animals to maintain our breeding herd or flock. We have to keep everything. So that's why we have 2 blank squares on that far left. But then as our reproductive performance goes up, the percentage of female weaners or maidens that we can introduce into the flock or herd goes up. And as our age groups go up, you'll see that that number increases more, because that what we're looking at here is that maidens make up a lesser percentage of your ewe flock or cow herd. So basically the message here is, if we get the reproductive rate right, that irrespective of the age groups, we're starting to get more animals that we can use in our flock rebuild or our herd rebuild. So one of my 2 take-home messages today for you is to do everything possible to get those future replacements on the ground and alive, and to be able to be used in your breeding program. So in the current climate, the managing of our female stock is as important now as it ever has been. I'm going to now talk about selection decisions. When we're talking about selection decisions, we're talking about obviously which of those females we keep, which of those males, bulls or rams, do we buy. So it's really important that when we make these decisions that they're aligned to your objective and they're using some sort of information. And I said the final point here is on performance. And what I mean by on performance is, I want you to take age out of the equation in terms of if those animals and cows in particular and ewes are still rearing lambs and doing the job for you, it is a wise investment to keep them going around again in terms of making sure that they're helping contribute. So when we talk about the factors that influence our selection within our flock or herd, obviously if we've got more variation for any given performance, we've got enough to pick on. When we talk about selection intensity, that means that within that variation that we're picking the best, and we want to breed from them as soon as possible. And so some of these are a little bit more important if you're rebuilding up the seed stock industry than the commercial, particularly that generation interval. But selection intensity is a real important thing that we want to try and do. So this, I guess, demonstrates any population that we have. So this might be your ewe or cow herd, and you'll find that you'll have your high performers on the far right, the lower performers on the far left, and the majority of our animals in the middle. And I think it's important to note when we talk about this, just the variation in terms of some work. So this is just an example using reproduction in sheep that Greg Lee and his team did. So the top 25% of ewes reared 41% of the lambs, and the bottom 25% weaned 8%. So that, I guess, just shows even within a 50%, so half the population equating for, I guess, nearly half of the lambs weaned, just the variation in performance there, and the importance to identify those high performers and look after them, and the key to remove the passengers where possible. So if we're talking about selecting for males, it's pretty easy because we're only picking a handful of animals. So if we're only picking 5 or 6 bulls or rams, the average of those rams is going to be, if we're doing our job, considerably higher than the average of that population there. So when we talk about selecting for the females, we're obviously talking about a lot bigger numbers. So based on some of the numbers I showed earlier that Jess Richards worked on, we might be selecting half those animals in a good year. So we can see that our mean of our selected stock isn't as high as it was if we were only choosing 5 or 6 bulls or rams. However, it is still above the mean of the population if we want to be making progress. The challenge that we have in a year like this, or a situation like we're in, is that we may need to retain a lot more. So if we need to retain 80% of our incoming herd or maidens to maintain the population, that mean of that selected progeny goes down a bit. And that's going to happen. Obviously, we have, as I mentioned earlier, significantly lower herd and flock sizes than we would have in good seasons. And this is all based on the information. So when there's that sort of compromise that you make on the use side, what this really shows is we really have to nail that focus on our ram and bull selection to help compromise for those hits that we take by retaining more females in the flock or herd. Okay, so in terms of that bull or ram selection, 2 steps before you start. So once again, what is your objective? I always like coming back to what is it that you're setting out to achieve. And I think a good point to start is, how do my bulls or rams align with that objective? So once again, if you're using objective information like ASBVs and EBVs, the ability to be able to access the latest information and compare where they sit in the industry can really help determine where your selection decisions are and how to make them smart. So similar to the use story, that if you have high performing genetics in your ram and bull cohort and they're structurally sound and fit for purpose, then it makes sense to keep those animals in the flock or herd again. But if you're going to market, once again, know your objective and use the information. So we talk about a range of traits, but the indexes that the breed societies and sheep genetics put out are the best way to select towards an outcome and an objective there. So it's taking in all those traits, all those correlations that you don't need to worry about. You just need to figure out which is the index that best aligns with your objective and look for the highest possible numbers there. And once you get to that side, that's then when you go that next step down. So when I talk about knowing your thresholds, I'm talking about what are the traits that are in that index that you need to put additional selection pressure on. So if we're talking about terminal size and bulls, what is the birth weight EBV or ASBV that you will not select higher than, i.e. if it is higher than 0.3, are you not going there for a Pole Dorset? If it's worm resistance in sheep, is there a number that you'll only buy if it's lower than that? Or fleece weight, marbling, it doesn't matter what the trait is, it's just important that you have a standard that you know and you don't select inferior animals for those standards. And when I talk about those thresholds, that's where knowing what you have at home really guides your selection decisions, because we want to be moving forward. So we don't want to be buying bulls or rams that are younger than what we have at home that are genetically inferior to them. So know what you have at home, have an idea of the merit, and make sure that you buy better merit males to introduce into the flock or herd. So where to get help on some of this stuff? As I mentioned at the start of my talk today, I haven't covered what is an EBV or an ASBV, but the MLA Genetics Hub has a lot of great updated information videos around the use of EBVs in temperate cattle, tropical cattle, and sheep that I strongly suggest you watch. There are a couple of tools around that can help with the alignment of rams or bulls to your breeding objective. So we have Ram Select on the sheep side of things, and Desire Bull that is being developed that will provide a similar functionality in the cattle game, and they're both hitting the market fairly soon. Lifetime Ewe Management and Bred Well Fed Well are a couple of courses out there that can help producers, one, with that reproductive management, and two, with the setting of breeding objectives and goals there. So they're two pretty handy extension packages that I recommend if you haven't got involved with, that you have a look at. So I'm only going to give you 2 points to finish on today. So the first one is that, as I showed, we have to look after our breeding females now better than ever before. So if we do that, then we have more young females entering our flock or herd that we can then potentially use in our rebuild. And the second point is buy the best genetics for your objective. When droughts mean that there is less competition sometimes for bulls and rams, there is never a better time to identify those genetically superior animals and buy them at a rate that might be cheaper than it would be in a contested market. So I just want to finish by acknowledging a couple of colleagues for their work in helping me present this today. So Jess Richards from the New South Wales DPI, Sam Clark from the University of New England, and Sam Walkham from AgBoo. Thanks, Megan. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Luke. Look, I found your presentation today really, really practical, and I guess really wanted to mention the fact that there's no one way of working, this out amongst all of the other things that people have got to work out. And there's some really, really sound advice that you've given today in terms of ways forward and some further information that people need to access. I guess people start asking some questions. I've got a couple starting to flow in now. We'll take some questions. I just wanted to have a bit of a chat with you about just that trade-off, Luke, in terms of the strategies of keeping some of those younger replacements within the flock. What are your thoughts on keeping them as a separate mob and maybe doing some crossbreeding if you've got a straight type of operation where you sell all of the progeny from those? Is that something that you think's a sound strategy for people going forward to boost numbers yet not maintain those? You touched on that before.
Yeah, absolutely. So our goal as livestock producers is matching feed demand to feed supply. So what we'll see potentially if we continue to get some good rain, which we're getting at the moment around New South Wales, and I hope that the rest of the country is getting some as well, is that you're going to have opportunities to diversify that enterprise. So that may mean that of those classed out animals where previously you may have sold them, you may join them to a different breed to produce for a different market there. And that's one strategy, I guess, that everyone takes. It's important to note in any strategy that just as I keep saying, it's based towards an objective and it's based on sound advice with evidence and not hunches.
Thank you. I also liked the bell curve that you popped up there to give a bit of an idea of the variation you might expect with maintaining these extra animals in the flock or the herd. It's not the end of the world, I guess, is something that, you know, I guess I took from that. Yeah, your overall averages are going to be a little bit lower, but the pluses of keeping those animals that you know and understand their management requirements, etc., is certainly a value to the business. Did you just can you just expand a little bit on that for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we go back to the slide I had around selection, so not just this part here, but this bit. So what we know when we're selecting more of those animals that we have more information on, our selection accuracy goes up there. So while that selection intensity decreases because we're maintaining or we're retaining, sorry, more a percentage of those animals, we're knowing a little bit more about what we're selecting on. So it's obviously one part, but that basically highlights the need to really nail our bull and ram selection and buy the best genetics that we can to make up for any of those slight hits that we take on the average performance of our females. So on the breeding upside, it is a lot harder to make the genetic gain across our flocks and herds as we rebuild. The real impact at the commercial level to drive genetic gain is on the other side when we're making selection decisions around which to keep. So if we had to reduce those numbers, making sure that we're maintaining those high genetic merit or high performing animals and not just culling on numbers is in the age of the stock.
Thanks, Luke. That's it's an important space to sort of think a little bit in advance in that area of trying to rebuild that flock. Lucy's just asked, do you agree that cows for your environment and bulls for your market is the right way forward in a pastoral setting, i.e. very hot, long walking distances and a dry environment? Thanks for that question, Lucy.
Yeah, look, I think it ultimately depends on what's the management system that underpins that operation. I think it's a very good message in terms of if your bulls are contributing 50% of the genetics, we want to make sure they've got a really good focus towards breeding towards a goal. So I wouldn't necessarily say that they're not also fit for the environment, because they do have to service those females, and there is nothing more frustrating for producers than buying genetics, i.e. bulls or rams, that can't fit or match that environment and break down, and you don't get the maximum serving out of those bulls or rams.
It's pretty important, I guess. It's quite a holistic and a number of things that we really need to think about when we're buying in, whether it be if we're buying in replacement females, but also bulls for our environment and where we're expecting them to carry out their job for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I touched on that in terms of those challenges, and it's making sure that have those genetics or been tested in the environment, and are they suitable for it? So if I'm a sheep producer up here in Armidale, I'm not buying sheep out of South Australia sight unseen, knowing can they hold up to a traditionally wet summer, and is that going to give me issues with fleece rot, as a good example, another example there.
Yeah, there's a lot to take into account, and Rebecca's just provided a comment basically saying, I suppose it would be prudent to seek genetics that are bred in a similar geographic area or similar environment rather than seeking new genetics elsewhere. And, she's commented that that's already been answered, but thanks for the comment, Rebecca. I've got another question here. Lucy said, thank you, Luke. Environment and market opportunities conflict significantly for them. I've got a question from Emma regarding how do you work out how much you should spend at the ram or bull sale, and what factors are you assessing? That's a good question.
Yeah, look, great question, Emma. There's obviously what people can pay for genetics really is independent of the own operation, and I think that's now more prudent than ever. So some of the activities that some of the workshops like Bredwell Fedwell and the old Ram Select workshop around, how many years are you going to use that bull or ram? What sort of superiority does it provide? And then looking at, okay, so that's based on that. And this is obviously very rough back of the envelope calculations, Emma, and I stress that in terms of then getting to a point where you go, okay, if I know that this animal is going to contribute $4 per ewe or per bull, per cow joined, times by the amount of cows, that might be how much more I'm willing to pay than an average ram. Now, the average is obviously is outside of your control because you don't decide who else goes to any given ram or bull sale. But you also need to decide basically where are those thresholds based on what can you financially be willing to spend on bulls and rams with your production system to get a return on that investment. And if you have that in place, and that might be through an open cry system, that might be the private selection, you can identify what you're willing to pay for some of those superior genetics. But it is, of course, very different on producers. But I think it's important that you have a bit of a plan and a budget before you go so that you don't pay big money for an animal that might only align to your breeding objective, say 4 out of 5 traits, when an animal might have been worth less that was more aligned, and it's just the nature of competition drove that one bull up or ram.
I guess it's such a critical part of the enterprise, purchasing, sires and having a really solid, understanding of what your breeding objective. And I think, going back to your suggestion about the Bredwell Fedwells, that's one of the real pluses of those workshops is the fact that you work out your breeding objective, but benchmarking where on the percentiles and what the minimum and the critical values which you've touched on, what they actually are, so that you can say, well, I might want to buy one that's in the top 5%, but as far as the rest of my animals go, I can get one that's in the top 20%. Which again, gives you that capacity to know that you're still buying animals that are going to contribute, positively to your breeding objective going forward, but you don't necessarily need to buy that one that's going to be the top of the sale to do that.
Yes, and I think an important thing to note is if we're talking about this from the commercial end, we're not just going to a sale to buy one bull or ram generally. We're going to buy multiple animals. So it's important that we've got that threshold and what we're willing to pay, and you stick to that average as close as you can. Yeah, sorry, I've just lost my point there after that.
Oh, yeah, look, I'll add something to that. It is important that you go there with an idea in mind of how many animals you need to buy and what their overall suitability is. It's all great to get the rock star, but if you've got to go and get the ones out of the bottom end of where your breeding objective lies, and let's face it, everybody's got a different breeding objective, but getting the animals that suit that breeding objective and match what it is that you're asking them to do with the direction of your flock going forward, it's really important that you go, well, I might need 6 bulls or rams or 10, 20, whatever. I need to buy them so that I'm not actually just putting a scattergun approach out there and I've got, one rock star and, one real shabby one, and, he's going to drag the averages down as well, and he's probably going to be the most active, as Murphy's Law would have it. He's probably going to go and cover the most ewes or the most cows and deliver you the least amount of progress. So again, thinking about that.
Because I think that's a really valid point. We assume we don't, while we assume that if we join a syndicate of bulls or rams that they'll service equally, it's not always the case. So the consistency in terms of that team or that cohort is really valuable.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, when we're buying rams or bulls, about the cohort, and it's important that we've got, all of the structure on the conformational type, boxes ticked, so that, they're functional and they're going to be able to walk those distances that Lucy discussed, and they're going to be able to survive in that, so they've got to have that sort of, constitution that we talk about a lot in the sheep industry, making sure that they're well put together, and then they've got those other attributes that are measured that are going to take that breeding program forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So my point there, and I apologise if I didn't cover it during the talk, our objective information is what we're using to rank those animals. In terms of getting eyes on and hands on sheep and cows before purchase, I can't stress highly enough in terms of making sure that structurally and visually those animals match up to what it is your enterprise is. So in the same way that I said know your thresholds with regards to objective information, really know your thresholds with regards to structural look and things of the animals, and do not go there if it's compromising those things. So particularly on that bull and ram side, because they have a much larger impact in your herd or flock than one individual cow or you may have.
It's pretty important, just to ensure and also mention, today that buying those size for your flock or herd is just so critical in making sure that they're, not passing on some structural faults that you're just going to see for, 10 years, because that's, we know that rams are, contributing, the genetics for, some, like, several years afterwards, and that's something that we really need to ensure and remind people about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just finish on that. I'm not finished. I'll just add a point on that, because obviously those rams have daughters, and then those daughters will get bred into your flock or herd, and then they'll have progeny, provided you don't identify and cull them all. So you're talking potentially 2 or 3 generations of an impact of a sire or a bull in the sire in the flock. And so even at that second generation, you're still talking 25% of that characteristic could still be in the flock or herd. So obviously we want to make sure that we're only introducing the good stuff at that level, because it can be 10, 15 years till you get rid of some of that impact of those bad traits.
Yeah, it's easy to introduce some of those, and a bit less easy to eliminate it if you've accidentally let some of them into your flock or herd. Just we talked a little bit about really looking after our breeding ewes like we've never looked after them before, and I think that's a really important point, because we want all of those animals doing their best job for our business going forward, because net reproduction rate's really going to help drive us forward. What are your thoughts on how important ram and bull preparation are in terms of making sure they're ready to work over such a short period? That's another question from Emma coming back on the back of the previous question that she asked.
Yeah, now that Emma gets the gold star for the great question so far. Look, it's absolutely important. So I think, whether they're existing animals in the battery, so whether we're talking about, bulls or rams that were going around, or introduced stock, it's really important that you are getting hands-on with those animals and making sure that they are physically, they're in the right conditions and they're ready to serve. So we don't want to be putting out animals that are lame or looking lame prior to joining, because they're not going to service the amount of ewes or cows that we need, particularly in those harsher environments that we just can't afford to miss on. So best practice management in terms of making sure that they're in the right condition, that they've been assessed structurally, depending on the 4 T's for sheep. So, type, teeth, testes and toes. Something similar, obviously without the wool, in the beef game is really important as well.
Very good. Gee, we're getting quite a few questions coming in. I was Just didn't open up my little box there. We've got one from Janelle. Do you suggest separating cows to smaller groups for joining if using multiple bulls? So 1 or 2 bulls aren't covering the majority, and does the same apply with sheep? Thanks, Janelle.
Yeah, look, it obviously depends on your infrastructure, Janelle. So, and what joining percentages you're willing to join your bulls or rams at. So, as I mentioned earlier, additional management might be required. So we probably might do things different with our maiden stock, at least in the sheep game, where we'll join a higher percentage of bulls to those, rams to those ewes, and a similar thing. But I guess the main point around it is that you'll know within your own operations what is possible with regard to that joining percentage, and it's just making sure that wherever those females and those do that, it's in a position where obviously it's going to promote the greatest chance of higher conception rates.
It's the good old conception rates that are really going to help us go forward now that areas are starting to have get some strong relief from the drought. I've got another question. Got another question on the basis of looking after female animals. How do I know that their nutritional needs are being met, and what strategies should I be looking at to unlock that genetic potential that they have?
Good question. So condition score in a 2-word answer. So making sure that our animals are in a decent condition score and managing to that accordingly really helps in terms of maximising from a reproductive point of view the chance that those females and that are going to be in their best chance of conceiving, the lambs hitting the ground, lambs surviving. So I can't speak enough, and that's obviously one of the benefits of a training package like Lifetime Ewe and Bred Well Fed Well, in that they give you some really good hands-on experience around condition scoring and how to get, I guess, better estimates of how your cows and ewes are tracking. So the big thing on top of that is it's that monitoring and record keeping, so that if you notice that they're starting to slide, that you improve the plane of nutrition that they're on, and that may mean paddock movement, that may mean introducing supplementary feed.
Again, it's about the proactive management that's really important in making sure that those ewes or cows are ready, match fit for their joining and gestation. Similar to preparing your rams, it's not sort of one or the other. It's about
it's the same
driving
across
nutrition.
The same across the entire talk, Megan, in that the more proactive we are with regards to having objectives, being actively seeking out those additional animals or seeking out, as opposed to reacting and having to take what's left at the market or take what's the last grade of bulls or rams from a buyer, means that we're going to be in a better position.
Absolutely. I just got a comment in here from one of our attendees today, just with regards to the amount of the impact of and longevity of genetics from rams in a flock. So, and they've said 25% of ram genetics are still in a flock 16 years later in a self-replacing system where a ram's used 4 times.
Yep, that makes sense.
Therefore, if their daughters and granddaughters are joined 5 times.
Mm-hmm. And that just once again shows that impact of making sure that the traits that we are looking for are desirable in where we want to go, and we're not introducing issues that we're going to have to deal with, potentially you're going to have to deal with. And if you're in one of those situations where succession plans in the business that future generations are going to have to deal with.
Absolutely. It's kind of the whole, looking backwards going, gosh, why did I ever do that? A bit like buying a secondhand lawnmower or something like that, isn't it? You sort of wish you'd bought a brand new one on the day. We're just about running out of time, but we've still got a couple more questions coming in, which is great. And this one's from Rebecca. When buying in stock, would it be fair to say that they need at least 6 weeks for their gut flora to adjust to new conditions, let alone going forward and cycling even longer for fed animals?
Okay, so in the interest of full disclosure, I'm not a ruminant nutritionist, but there is obviously, as you're changing diets, that there is a process in that. And that's why, so if it's things like introducing to grains or different feeds, that it's done gradually, is my recommendation there.
Yeah, and look, I guess, following up on that, again, when buying in any new animals, they do take a period of time to adjust to their new environment. And, it's not ideal to be bringing your rams home and just driving the trailer straight out to put them over the UUs or something like that. So again,
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Preparation key, like making sure that they've got all their biosecurity, boxes ticked and that kind of thing. So you're not introducing any nasties, but also giving them the opportunity to adjust to their environment. We've just got two more questions. No, we've got a few more questions, but I've got one comment/question here from Julie, which is a fabulous one, just relating to the unavailability of face-to-face workshops such as the Bred Well, Fed Well, and is there any chance of some webinars? And I guess from the Sheep Connect New South Wales perspective, we held a Ramping Up Repro one a couple of weeks back, might be 3 weeks back now, to provide, the vast majority of our key messages from some of these face-to-face workshops available given the current circumstances and restrictions. We've got other ones planned within Sheep Connect New South Wales itself, but certainly I'm happy to forward that question on to MLA with regards to the Bred Well, Fed Well as a webinar. So Julie, thank you for that question.
Yeah, and I'd just add to that, like obviously any opportunity that you have to upskill, be it online in this situation where you can do it in your own time, I'd strongly suggest that now. It's the same as investing in your business, invest in the people in the business and you're going to make some real strides.
Yeah, just on that, there's been quite a number of webinars staged in recent times due to the restrictions on a vast array of topics by different providers. So not just Sheep Connect New South Wales, not just the Back to Business, but certainly have a look on, we've got all of the Back to Business and the Thursday Sheep Connect webinars on our website. All the recordings are freely available. As well, MLA have got their webinars on their website as well that are available to view, and I'm sure that other providers are providing that as well. The other thing, just in following up the question from Rebecca with regards to the nutrition and adjustment, we had a livestock biosecurity and animal health webinar as part of this series, Rebecca. If you might have missed that, Dr. Gillian Kelly from Local Land Services covered with a high degree of detail some of the pitfalls and must-dos and try to avoids in terms of buying in stock and adjusting, getting them adjusted to their environment. So that might be something worth having a look at. I've got one question which I've been holding for a little while from Aileen with regards to how difficult is it to source ewes in the current market of suitable conformation and performance that are also in the JBAS or the OJD, like to fit all the biosecurity and to meet on farm requirements. That's I'm not sure that that's something that we can necessarily answer here, but again, I'd probably point you, Aileen, back to that webinar that Gillian Kelly presented. Luke, did you have anything that you wanted to add in that space?
No, I think you've covered it, Megan. Obviously, there's in terms of the markets, there's going to be, depending on the breed type, the region, and whatever other biosecurity restrictions. In some areas, there'll be a lot easier to introduce animals in, and I guess that's why we're seeing a lot of animals leaving Western Australia heading east. And in other areas, it's going to be a bit tougher because there's those animals, and that drives then those prices based on obviously the market as well.
Excellent, thank you. Look, that's all the questions that we've got, and we've just about to clock over into 2 p.m. So we might wrap it up there. And I just wanted to say thanks so much, Luke, for joining us today and for your valuable insights. Certainly helpful to those who are looking to boost up their reproduction and their flocks and herds going forward. Also wanted to thank everybody who's joined us today. We've certainly had a good roll up of attendees, and welcome back to those who were frequent flyers, so to speak, and welcome to anybody who's joined us for the first time today. A couple of final reminders before I close the webinar is please answer our evaluation questions. We really want to know what future topics you'd like to hear. But we also want to know what you think of how our webinars are going. And we do look over the evaluations after each of our webinars. Don't forget to register for next week's webinar, and the link for that will be coming straight to your email inbox this afternoon with the recording from today. And for those of you who do like a podcast, we'll be producing today's webinar and all of our other Back to Business webinars as a podcast. Some of you might already be subscribed to those. The subscriptions and the listens are growing each week, which is pleasing to see. So if you do like to receive your information via a podcast or know somebody who does, then jump onto wherever you get your podcasts from and search Back to Business and subscribe to our podcasts there. So thanks again, everybody, for your time today. We know how busy people are and certainly appreciate the time that everybody's taken to join us. Thanks again, Luke. And on behalf of Meat and Livestock Australia, Australian Wool Innovation, Australian Wool, AWI Sheep Connect New South Wales, Integrity Systems Company, New South Wales DPI, Local Land Services and New South Wales Farmers, just wanted to wish everybody a very good afternoon, and we look forward to catching up with you next week. Thanks and bye for now.